Welcome back to Face the Nation. We turn now to North Dakota Congressman Kelly Armstrong. He's on the Judiciary Committee, which is where the impeachment process is headed next. Congressman, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
As we said, you're on the committee where this process moves to next. Do you have any indication on what the timeline is and what this is going to look like as those articles of impeachment are drafted?
I don't, and I think as we continue to move forward, I think the one thing that is true is that the Democrats are going to lose more and more control over this. I mean, at some point in time, Democrats are going to have to enforce some of the rules they pass in their own legislation, but regardless of how you feel about this, this has been the most narrowly tailored and controlled thing by Chairman Schiff, both in the depositions, which I was a part of, and in the Intelligence Committee. But as it moves over to the Judiciary Committee, they're going to lose more and more of that control. And for sure,
meaning what?
Just there are rules where the president gets to have his lawyer and those types of things. Now, I get a little concerned about those because with all of those rules, the chairman has absolute veto power. But if they continue down this place, eventually it's going to end up in the Senate, and they're going to go there. And I think it's important. They were talking about the poll numbers this morning with Emerson, and there's a Vanity Fair article out that I think is probably the most important, and that is 62% of independents think that impeachment's more important to politicians, 61% think it's more important to the media. So when you come from a state like mine and you continue to work through all of these things, I just don't think that as a political exercise, I don't think it has been a success for the Democrats over the last 2 weeks.
Okay, so put the political exercise apart from this, and in terms of what you actually heard testified to, someone whose name came up repeatedly was Rudy Giuliani, and federal prosecutors, we now know, are investigating his activities in Ukraine. Are you comfortable with somebody who's not working for the U.S. government being this involved in foreign policy?
I think irregular channels have been used a lot, and I've said this from day one. One of the reasons President Trump got elected is because he does things very differently.
Do you know what Rudy Giuliani was tasked with doing?
I don't. I mean, he was working through all of those things and working towards
corruption.
Gordon
Sondland testified that it was Rudy Giuliani who was carrying out the quid pro quo, and that it was the president who told him to work with Rudy Giuliani.
Gordon Sondland testified that that was his assumption, and the third different testimony he gave, because Gordon Sondland has given 3 different versions of the event, but when pressed on it by Republicans on the committee, he said that he never directly heard any of those things, and it was only assumptions he was making.
Well, he did testify on May 23rd that the president told him to work directly with Giuliani. But Ambassador Volker, who I know Republicans point to his testimony, as Kellyanne Conway just did, he testified that it was Rudy Giuliani who was feeding President Trump this very negative view of Ukraine. And in fact, he was listening to that more than his own intelligence experts. Does that concern you?
Well, I don't think that's entirely true. I mean, Roll Call was covering Ukraine's involvement. Politico was covering it. And before you get into any of those things, the president has said, I mean, we know actively that Ukrainian government officials were actively campaigning against the president in the 2016 election. He was very clear. This president is skeptical of foreign aid. He was skeptical of the
You're talking about people who were no longer in the Ukrainian government who wrote op-eds that just said President, then candidate Trump was against Russia.
Not just
You're
that.
not, are you, I just want to clarify because we went through this just a few minutes ago. Are you actually believing the theory that Ukraine and not Russia hacked the DNC servers?
No, and I don't think that's where you go. I mean, but they're trying to make this a binary choice between Russia and the Ukraine, and that's not what it is. And if you listen to Ambassador Hill's testimony, I mean, she had an opening statement, but if you listen to her testimony throughout the course of the day, she acknowledged a lot of these things. Not to put too fine a point on it, but the reason we're talking about the Ukraine is because we've had 2 weeks of impeachment hearings regarding the Ukraine. Those things are mutually exclusive, and I think the Republicans on the Intelligence Committee did a fantastic job of pointing out that how Russia interfered with the 2016 elections.
Would you be comfortable with a Democrat or any other president asking a foreign government to investigate a political opponent?
Facts of this thing don't change, and that's part of this. This president was interested in how Ukraine interfered in the 2016 election. He was interested in the corruption of Ukraine. He's always been skeptical of foreign aid. There was no favor. There was nothing that happened. The aid was released.
So the answer is you are comfortable?
I think there's only one person that gets away with talking the way he does, and that's President Trump, and that's why the American people elected him. And that's one thing, again, as you see through all of these conversations that have occurred, is these career
so no
federal
one but
employees.
President Trump should be allowed to get away with this?
No, I just think President Trump communicates in a way that is the reason why he got elected, because he doesn't do the things the way everybody else does that. And you can tell that's a frustration from where we talk about career federal employees versus President Trump. President Trump said the phone call was perfect. President Zelensky has said on numerous occasions that he didn't feel pressure. I do. I think you have the transcript and you have the two principals on the phone call that have stated that. And after that, everything else is really just noise.
We have to leave it there. Congressman, thank you for joining us. We'll be back with our legal panel in a moment. Joining us now to help decipher the Constitution and discuss what might or might not be technically impeachable are CBS News legal analysts. That's Jonathan Turley and Kim Wehle, and CBS News White House correspondent Paula Reid, who also covers the Justice Department. Good to have you all here. I say decipher because there is going to be a debate over how do you define high crimes and misdemeanors, which along with treason and bribery are how the Constitution lays out grounds for impeachment. I know, because we've been talking all week, that you think there is a case to be made for abuse of power. Is that what you think an article of impeachment could be?
I think you can make a case out for abuse of power, but you're going to have to do some changes. You got to reschedule, you've got to reframe this case, and you have to repeat some of this testimony, because right now this seems designed to fail. It's an incomplete record. And the problem is you have an audience that is listening just to hear the lines they want to hear.
Right.
When you step back and look at the whole, it is incomplete, and a member would have a good faith basis to vote against conviction on that basis.
Well, you heard Will Hurd of Texas, the congressman, say at the conclusion of the hearing that he was not persuaded. And he's one of the so-called moderate Republicans who people had been hoping might be able to be persuaded to go along with Democrats. And he basically said, I have not heard the case for bribery. Did you hear the case for bribery, Kim?
Well, bribery is expressed in the Constitution, and the idea is the framers did not want people in power using that power for their own personal gain. So if that's the definition, yes. And of course, high crimes and misdemeanors is actually broader than just bribery and treason, and includes things that can't be crimes. So for example, if the president were to move to the Kremlin and operate the White House out of the Kremlin, that wouldn't be a crime, but we'd say maybe that's impeachable. So there's some place in between just doing a bad job and crimes and abuse of power. And I think we are squarely in that area right now with this president.
You're saying it's not, when people apply their sort of law and order courtroom scenario to this particular case, you can't do that. It's not the same legal standard.
It's not the same legal standard, and it's really hard to wrap a lawyer's mind, my lawyer's mind, around what more we need, right? Besides directly the president asking for this actual bribe, so to speak, or $400 million, it will be withheld. White House meeting will be withheld unless you announce an investigation into my political opponent. So we have interference in the election again by the president or part of with Rudy Giuliani. That's problematic, number one, and asking for foreign interference, which is banned by our federal campaign laws.
And you're skeptical of this. What would you need to hear to persuade you?
First of all, this is not bribery. The Supreme Court unanimously rejected this type of interpretation, unanimously in the McDonald case.
Right.
Right, but you can't invoke bribery, and then when people point out this isn't bribery, say, well, this is impeachment, it doesn't matter. You're invoking bribery because it's a serious criminal offense, and they don't have a complete record. This is like hearing Hamlet from Rosencrantz and Guildenstern alone. You need to talk to the royal family.
And it'd be great if the White House would comply with the subpoenas.
Well,
I want to get to Paula on that, because you had Kellyanne Conway here saying they're preparing for all scenarios, Senate trial, or if the Democrats just don't move ahead with impeachment. What are they actually planning for?
No, this is all about the court of public opinion. As Kellyanne Conway said, the White House counsel's office, the attorneys they've hired, they're working on the legal strategy. But for the president, he's approaching this just as he's approached all the other investigations, with aggressive messaging, and he is the messenger. But our recent CBS News poll showed about 56% of Americans don't think he's doing a very good job, which is why you saw them bring in Pam Bondi, Tony Sayegh to help with the messaging. But it's been interesting. This strategy has really divided the West Wing. While the White House counsel's office wants to be very aggressive, protect executive privilege, there are others in the Chief of Staff's office and elsewhere in the West Wing who want to be more transparent. They feel like, look, if we have nothing to hide, let's be more cooperative. And then the communications staff, the folks who work there every day, they're not very happy they're bringing other people in. So it's unclear if this strategy has actually been successful outside or inside the White House.
Should we read into the fact that the legal team you just described, that communications team's not here or anywhere this Sunday?
Absolutely. We saw one of the members, Pam Bondi. She was on CBS this morning, earlier this week. She struggled with the basic facts of this case. So it does not surprise me that we now see Kellyanne Conway, who is one of the most effective advocates for the president, particularly when it comes to legal investigations, that she is now doing more of the forward messaging.
I want to ask you about the other development that we still don't quite have clarity on, which is what Rudy Giuliani's real role is. He's been very vocal in the past 24 hours or so, but also the fact that he himself is now the subject of an investigation. Is that a part of this story that you think needs to be fleshed out before Democrats go any farther?
It is. I mean, the Democrats have to decide if they want a real or recreational impeachment. A real impeachment means calling people like Giuliani and others to appear and then compelling them to appear. You can't create the shortest period of investigation in history for an impeachment and then impeach a president for failing to turn over documents in that period because he went to the courts. If that is obstruction for a president to seek judicial review in a conflict with Congress, then you could have impeached every living president, particularly Barack Obama, who made the same type of extreme interpretations when he refused documents and witnesses in Fast and Furious. So, we at some point, adult supervision has to kick in here. And we have to decide, are we really trying to remove this president? And if so, the case has to be made.
What is Rudy Giuliani's role, Paula?
He is still a member of the president's personal legal team, and
even though he's under investigation himself.
Yes, but he'd been gone quiet for a while, and then he burst back onto the scene over the last 10 days. And I texted him, I asked him, I said, is this at the direction of the president? And he told me that he takes his instructions from his client. So it appears, even though he is under investigation by the Trump Justice Department for his dealings in Ukraine, the president continues to retain him as one of his personal attorneys, even working on Ukraine. And I have heard, and the president has said publicly, the reason is the president still sees Rudy Giuliani as he was in 9/11. He believes truly that he brings gravitas to his case and to his defense.
Well, it definitely keeps us busy. Paula, thank you. Thanks to all of us. We'll be back in a moment with our political panel. That was Bernie Sanders doing some more dancing. Wonder if he'll still be having the time of his life. Dad joke with Michael Bloomberg, now in the race, a billionaire. He talks a lot about them. We're going to have some analysis now from Rich Lowry. He's the editor of National Review and author of a new book, The Case for Nationalism, How It Made Us Powerful, United, and Free. Tolu Olorunipa covers the White House for The Washington Post. He's also a CNN political analyst. Susan Page is the Washington bureau chief of USA Today, and Joel Payne is the Democratic strategist and CBS News contributor. Thank you all for being here. Rich, Michael Bloomberg used to be a Republican.
He did?
He does have a record that he will have to explain in terms of policies when he was New York mayor, stop and frisk and the like. The allegation was nanny state in terms of, restrictions on big gulps and things like that. But is he the kind of centrist Democrat that Republicans might be able to warm up to if they're not going to vote for Trump?
I think Michael Bloomberg has probably seriously annoyed everyone in the country over some particular issue over the course of his career. And just the theory of his campaign here, I've been wrong before, but seems preposterous. Skipping Iowa or New Hampshire usually doesn't work out well for candidates, but skipping the first four contests and then bludgeoning your way into the race through sheer financial force after that, after it significantly gelled, just seems absurd to me, and a way to spend a lot of money and make a lot of consultants rich, but not win many delegates.
And not any support from Republicans either.
He has the first
you don't think
part
he's
of the
got an
process
actual
is
shot
winning
at
the
being
Democratic
the nominee.
nomination. Yeah, and prior to this point, early in polling just didn't show very warm feelings for him among Democrats to begin with.
Joel, is that also your read?
I think that's right. I also have the ridiculous hot take that Democrats like to vote for Democrats, and Mike Bloomberg is famously not a Democrat; he's an independent. I do think that he is trying to build goodwill with the party, not just with all of the ads that he's buying to spread his name, but he's also supporting a lot of Democratic progressive initiatives, voter registration. He's spent a lot of money supporting gun control and climate change. So I think he has eased a lot of concerns and allayed a lot of concerns with the leadership of the party. We'll see if that actually turns into votes. Tom Steyer's tried it. It hasn't worked out. We'll see if it works for Bloomberg.
He also supported a lot of Democrats in 2018.
He did.
So that must have won some goodwill.
That did win some goodwill. And, the Bloomberg candidacy is really, it's a vote of no confidence for Joe Biden. I mean, Joe Biden was supposed to be...
You agree with Kellyanne Conway, essentially.
I mean, essentially, because the theory of the case is that Joe Biden was supposed to be the person that owned that moderate middle lane in the Democratic Party. It has not worked out yet, or at least the people behind Joe Biden probably don't feel that way quite yet. There's still time for the former vice president to earn that support, but he's got a lot of competition now with someone like Bloomberg. And by the way, Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, there are other moderates in the race who've come after his support.
Susan, I know you're always looking at polls and polling, but these hearings just concluded on Thursday. For people who make the argument that they didn't move the needle really in favor of Democrats, are they making a judgment too soon? And do you think that this impacts the presidential race in any way?
I think the needle hasn't moved since the election in 2016. The needle has been pretty well set for President Trump and for the opponents of President Trump. And
this was going to be a partisan vote no matter what.
It's going to be a partisan vote. This is the very reason Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker, didn't want to go down the path of impeachment on the theory that you needed it to be bipartisan. That was going to be very, very difficult. And you needed to persuade the public. That is also very difficult. So I think we end up kind of where we began, that the Democrats are convinced that President Trump is a toxic president. And most Democrats, I think, believe that he deserves to be impeached. Republicans are standing behind him. That's where we are. And the question of what this does in the 2020 election is one I think is impossible to answer at this point. I think it is a fool's errand to try to look at the Clinton impeachment or any other history to try to figure out how this is going to unfold over the next year.
Because no sitting president has gone through an impeachment and a re-election at the same time.
That's right, and because we're in such unusual times where we seem so frozen into tribal camps.
Tolu, you heard Congressman Armstrong make the case that no other president really could talk like this and get away with it, but that's okay. On Friday, we saw kind of an example of how President Trump is vocal and unusual and really undeterred by this entire impeachment process when he gave that nearly hour-long interview live on Fox. Yeah. What was that?
That was the president sort of giving his view of this entire impeachment process, and he's embracing conspiracy theories that even his staunchest Republican supporters are not embracing, talking about CrowdStrike and talking about Ukrainian hacking. It's clear that other Republicans are going to make excuses for that. They're going to say this is just the president. He still has a hold on our voters. He is someone who has been able to launch himself into the top of the Republican Party and take control of the party.
And said he would look forward to a trial in the Senate.
Yeah, and for the president, this is a loyalty test. He wants to make sure that he has full loyalty from his party going into 2020, and anyone who breaks apart from him is going to suffer consequences, both from the president's Twitter account and also from his primary voters. So he's been able to coalesce his party behind him, and the fact that you have Republicans saying, oh, this is just the way the president talks, no one else could get away with it, means that you're not likely to see very many Republicans break from him, but independence will be the key.
Congressman Himes kind of gave an opening there indicating that they still were holding out hope the White House would produce documents as part of their investigation. Is there any change at the White House on that front that we know of?
I don't think so. I mean, I think the president will release the documents that he thinks are favorable to him, like he released a transcript of the second call that happened in April to explain what happened, and everyone in the administration was in the dark about this. And I don't think they're going to release anything because I don't know that there's anything that's sort of exonerating for the president to show that this was a sort of a well thought out plan to withhold the aid for a specific reason, and the Democrats are saying that the reason was all political.
The RNC chair, Ronna McDaniel, said this week there is an absolute influx of smaller donations since impeachment has ramped that up. Is impeachment helpful to the president's reelection?
I don't know. I think probably he'll be impeached and acquitted, and 2 weeks later it'll feel like old news, the way everything feels like old news. And I think if these hearings were just on par with the Iran-Contra hearings back in the Reagan era, hearings to get the facts out, extract damaging revelations, dominate the headlines, they'd be a home run. The question, though, is whether this particular episode can bear the weight of impeaching and removing a president literally for the first time in our history. And to that question, I think the answer is no.
Well, removal.
And you see, right, removing, yeah. And on the cusp of a re-election, he very well could win. And I think that's the huge hurdle that Democrats can't get over. They're not getting over even with moderate Trump critics like Representative Wehle.
So, Joel, I mean, is the DNC also successfully fundraising off impeachment?
I think there's been a lot of hand-wringing, the suggestion that Democrats are on the defensive now. All the polling I've seen actually demonstrates that this is still a winner of an issue for Democrats. It's still a +5 or a +6 issue for Democrats across the board. The CBS poll that I saw last week had it at +50% supporting the inquiry. Even with independents, less than half of them opposed it. I think that Democrats are going to be watching what happens in some battleground states. But broadly speaking, the timing here matters also. The fact that this will likely be wrapped up by MLK or Groundhog Day, the fact that for 10 months Republicans are probably going to have to run on the idea that President Trump wasn't impeached, or rather he was impeached, he wasn't removed, but you still got to run on a record of trying to take away health care from millions of Americans, from locking up kids in cages. That's still a record that Democrats are going to push, so there's plenty of time for that to set in.
But it's only going to be wrapped up so quickly because, per Jonathan Turley's point earlier, they're leaving all the first-hand witnesses off the table, which they could secure if they waited a little bit longer and
John
litigated
Bolton,
it.
you're talking about.
Yeah, and Mulvaney and Pompeo and
Do you think
and
they'd
Pence.
actually be allowed to
Not clear
show
that they
up?
could get 'em.
I think it'd be decided by the courts. I think there is a colorable, at least, privilege claim, immunity claim in all these cases, but you'd have to wait 2 or 3 months, and they don't want to do that explicitly because it's a political timetable. So they're going to send an incomplete case to the Senate.
No guarantee in 2 or 3 months that you'd get these witnesses. There's no guarantee by the election day you would get these witnesses. And Democrats have made the calculation that they've got enough in their mind to impeach the president, so they should move ahead. This helps the president with his base. I think this hurts the president with that sliver, that small group of independent-minded swing voters in the middle. Many of them suburbanites, white college-educated people who voted for him last time, abandoned Republicans in 2018. I think it is a mixed blessing for the president.
Tolu, what does a Senate trial actually look like?
Well, for the president, it looks like trying to get Hunter Biden and trying to get all of these people who would be political opponents of the president to testify and dig up dirt on them. But I think for the American people, it could expose some of the things that the president was doing, which does not look good, even if it may not be impeachable in the minds of very many Americans. Definitely not a positive.
We'll be right back. That's going to be it for us today. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to join us next week. We will be celebrating a Face the Nation tradition with our holiday book panel. This year's theme is patriotism, politics, and the president. In the meantime, all of you have a very happy Thanksgiving. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.